Wealthy mother-in-law insulted my job at a family dinner. She said, "You must love taking orders, you were born for it," in front of everyone, but the next morning her company sent me a job offer letter as their new CFO. So, do you think she knows? Henry stirred his tea absent-mindedly, staring at our condo's kitchen window. I don't think she did then. But she definitely does now. He looked at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She hasn't said a word. Of course not, I said, picking up the offer letter again. That would mean admitting she was wrong. It started with a dinner party. Like so many family dramas do. Margot Mallory, my mother-in-law, is a woman who doesn't just enter rooms, she dominates them. With her sharp suits, sharper tongue, and a resume thicker than a law textbook, she has built a real estate empire across Chicago and the Midwest. Mallory Sterling and Company is a name people respect and fear a little. When she speaks, people either listen or they pretend to listen very well. I always knew I wasn't exactly what she wanted in a daughter-in-law. Margot had envisioned someone with more sparkle. Someone who wore pearls to brunch and played tennis at the club. Instead, she got me, Natalia Baird, raised by two public school teachers in Lincoln Park, now 41, self-made, and working quietly but steadily in corporate finance. No drama. No spotlight. Margot smiled through our interactions, but it never felt warm. It always felt like she was waiting for me to trip so she could point and say, "See? Henry, my husband, is nothing like her." A university librarian with a philosopher's heart and a deep love for poetry, he's calm, gentle, and often clueless about his mother's sharper undertones. He believed she'd come around. I knew better. For the first year of our marriage, I endured family dinners that felt more like job interviews. I was asked about my salary, whether I owned or rented, and which business school I had gone to. Margot loved to pit people against one another in subtle, elegant ways. Still, I held my ground. I didn't try to impress her, and that, in its own way, infuriated her more than if I had failed to meet her standards. Then came that dinner. It was a crisp October evening at Margot's estate just north of Evanston, overlooking the lake. A sprawling glass sandstone masterpiece that screamed old money trying to look new. The dining room was something out of a magazine, a 12-seater walnut table, tall candlesticks, soft classical music playing in the background, and staff in black and white uniforms gliding around like ghosts. The guest list was predictable: her business partner's wife, a few family members, some local politicians, and us. The conversations were mostly about real estate trends, high-end renovations, and whose child had made it into an Ivy League school. At one point during dinner, she started her usual performance, asking each person to talk about their professional highlights like it was a networking event rather than a family meal. Everyone gave their rehearsed responses: promotions, deals closed, board seats offered. Then she turned to me. "Natalia," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "remind us what it is you do again?" I took a sip of my wine, calmly. "Director of Financial Planning at Kenway Logistics." Her eyebrows arched, faux impressed. "Still there, are you?" That's steadfast. She paused just long enough to create discomfort. "Must be fulfilling. I suppose you must love taking orders. You were born for it, weren't you?" The table went silent. Even the staff paused for half a breath. I looked at her, met her eyes, and smiled. I think competence is often underestimated by those who've never had to earn it. She blinked, just once. Then returned to her lamb. I didn't say another word for the rest of dinner. I didn't need to. But that night, lying in bed beside Henry, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Clarity. And the next morning, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mallory Sterling and Company. Subject: offer letter, Chief Financial Officer. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I opened the attachment. There it was. A formal offer, addressed to me. 6-figure salary. Executive benefits. Equity options. And a personal note from the CEO, Stephen Garrison, saying he had admired my presentation at a finance conference the year before and had quietly followed my career since. I stared at the screen for several minutes. I didn't tell Henry immediately. I walked around the block twice. I sat with the offer in my email inbox, reading every line carefully. Not once, not twice, but 4 times. And then I told him. He looked at me like I had handed him a script from a play he never auditioned for. "You're going to be her CFO?" he asked. "Seems that way." "Do you think she knows?" "I don't think she even knew I was on their radar." Later, I learned the truth. Margot wasn't involved in the selection process at all. Stephen had intentionally kept her out, citing conflict of interest. Apparently, she was furious when she found out. She sent him an email, questioning how he could appoint her daughter-in-law to such a high-ranking position without her input. His reply was forwarded to me later. "That's exactly why you weren't involved. And I've never respected a CEO more." I didn't respond right away. I thought about it for 3 full days. Thought about the power dynamics. About Margot. About Henry. About what it would mean to walk into her company, not as a subordinate, not even as a peer, but as someone higher up in the chain of command. But in the end, I accepted. I joined Mallory Sterling and Company 3 weeks later. Quietly. No big announcements. No grand gestures. Just a new badge, a new office, and a direct line to the executive board. Margot and I have now had exactly 6 meetings together. Each one was strictly professional. We haven't spoken about the dinner. We haven't spoken about the offer. We haven't spoken, really, beyond what's necessary. But I see the change in her eyes. She no longer asks me what I do. And now, when she enters a room, she looks to see if I'm already in it. It didn't take long for the shift in the power dynamic to ripple through the company. I didn't come in like a wrecking ball, never been my style. I was deliberate. Strategic. The first 90 days were all about observation. Listening in executive meetings, learning where the inefficiencies were buried, where the overspending had been quietly accepted as the cost of doing business. I didn't come to make noise. But change? That was always coming. The CFO who retired left behind a financial structure that leaned heavily on old assumptions. The markets had changed, logistics and real estate weren't operating in silos anymore, and yet the company's model still treated them like they were stuck in 2015. I updated those models. And then I updated the people. The real estate division, Margot's Kingdom, was bloated. 5 redundant mid-level managers who had created their own fiefdoms over the years, all of them reporting to different senior VPs who hadn't spoken candidly to one another in over a decade. I didn't fire anyone. Not yet. But I shifted reporting structures. Consolidated departments. Made it impossible to hide inefficiency behind titles. Every dollar became traceable. Margot didn't say anything directly, but during one board meeting, she made a pointed comment about consultants who come in, move numbers around, and think they've made change. Stephen, the CEO, leaned forward and replied without looking at her, "Natalia's not a consultant, Margot. She's the one steering this ship now." There was a pause. One of those thick, syrupy silences where everyone senses something tense but doesn't want to stir it. She said nothing in return. But she didn't make any more comments like that in future meetings. At home, Henry tried to walk the line between supportive partner and concerned son. I saw it in the way he watched me get ready in the morning now, his eyes lingering longer, not quite worried, but different. "You're changing," he said one night as we both sat with glasses of wine on the couch. "I'm growing," I replied. "There's a difference." "I know. I love watching it. But also, I know how my mother works. She doesn't lose gracefully. That much I already knew." What surprised me was how passive her resistance was. No explosions. No screaming matches. No dramatic ultimatums. Just a gradual, precise withdrawal of warmth. It started at family dinners. Fewer invitations. Shorter conversations. Less eye contact. She didn't try to sabotage me, not overtly. But she didn't make it easy either. She'd push back on proposals during meetings, not because they were flawed, but because I had written them. She'd question numbers that had already been vetted by 3 other executives. She'd ask for clarification on terms she'd been using herself for 20 years. I kept my responses measured. Every time she tried to undermine me, I came back with data. Not emotion. Not sarcasm. Not bitterness. Just numbers. And that, more than anything, seemed to get under her skin. It wasn't just the boardroom where the lines blurred. There were family moments too, those soft spots where work and home collided in awkward, unspoken ways. At her birthday party in December, she made a toast thanking everyone for believing in the family legacy and helping it grow. She looked right at me. Didn't mention my name. Didn't need to. The room still turned toward me, silently waiting for a reaction. I just smiled and raised my glass. Afterward, Henry squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. My parents never quite understood the world I had stepped into. When I told my father I'd taken the CFO role at Mallory Sterling, he blinked. Isn't that her company? It is. And she's okay with that? She doesn't really get a say. He just laughed. Well, I hope she knows what she's dealing with. I think she was learning. Because the more I settled into the role, the more I saw her recalibrate. She started speaking more cautiously in meetings. She stopped offering unsolicited advice. She even, once, asked me for my thoughts on a restructuring plan she was preparing. I gave her my honest opinion. Told her it was top-heavy, and that it relied too much on outdated property value projections from 2 years prior. She blinked, didn't say anything, and then walked out of the meeting without a word. The next week, I saw a revised version of the plan. Everything I mentioned had been addressed. No acknowledgement. No thank you. But the numbers spoke for themselves. The tension didn't dissolve overnight. If anything, it calcified into something more permanent, a quiet stalemate. A détente between 2 women used to controlling the narrative, now forced to coexist under the same roof of a multi-million-dollar empire. But something had changed in me, too. I stopped waiting for her approval. I stopped wondering whether I was good enough for her son, or worthy of being at the table. I knew I belonged there now. I had proof. In the metrics. In the respect of the board. In the outcomes. I didn't need her blessing. I had become something else entirely. Necessary. And necessary is something even Margot Mallory couldn't deny forever. A few months into the job, I started noticing small gestures. Not from Margot, but from everyone around her. The executive assistant who used to pause before adding me to emails now copied me without hesitation. The VP of Legal, who once routed everything through Stephen, began reaching out to me directly. Even the junior analysts, many of whom had no idea who I was when I joined, started popping into my office more often, asking smart questions, presenting fresh data without being prompted. There was a shift in tone when people said my name. Less formality. More respect. Not the performative kind, real, earned trust. I wasn't just Margot's daughter-in-law anymore. I was the person who made payroll numbers make sense, who streamlined budget forecasts, who identified revenue leaks that had been quietly draining the company for years. The funny thing about competence is that it speaks louder over time than any resume or last name ever could. At home, Henry felt the shift too. He was proud, I could tell. He brought it up casually when we were out with friends or during late-night wine sessions on the couch. But every now and then, I caught a flicker of something else in his voice. Not resentment exactly, maybe distance. Like he was watching me cross into a world he couldn't quite follow. I feel like you live in another universe these days, he said one night, not accusingly, just thoughtfully. I leaned into him. I'm trying to balance both. I know, he said. I'm just not sure your mother-in-law is. We didn't talk about Margot much at home anymore. Not directly. She'd become this ever-present force, never discussed, but always looming, like weather. Predictable in temperament. Occasionally volatile. One evening, I got home late after a board strategy session that ran 2 hours over. Henry had left a note on the kitchen island next to a plate of reheated lasagna. Went to bed early. Long day. Hope the presentation went well. Love you. I sat down in the quiet and thought about how strange my life had become. There I was, leading the financial future of the company his mother built, and somehow, the one person I hadn't really spoken to about it was her. Then, the next morning, it happened. Margot stopped by my office. No meeting on the calendar. No assistant warning me. Just her silhouette in the frosted glass of my door, her knock, a single tap, and then she walked in without waiting. She was wearing one of her signature navy suits, a shade too crisp for morning. She carried a manila folder and that unreadable expression she wore when she was calculating 10 things at once. I need your input, she said, holding out the folder. I opened it. It was a property divestment plan. One of her oldest assets in Bucktown, an aging commercial strip that hadn't been profitable in 6 years. She sat across from me, perfectly still. No preamble? I asked. No small talk? I don't believe in wasting time. I flipped through the pages. The numbers were off, by a lot. I looked up. This was valued on 2020 data, I said. If you used post-pandemic market comps, this doesn't make sense. You're undervaluing it by at least $3 million. She didn't flinch. So you're saying don't sell? I'm saying not yet. Reposition the asset first, restructure the lease terms. I'll send you a plan by tomorrow. She nodded once. Good. And just like that, she stood up and left. No argument. No icy remark. Not even a thank you. But something had shifted. I felt it in the silence she left behind. The following weekend, Henry and I were invited to brunch at Margot's estate. This was rare. Since I'd taken the CFO role, she'd largely kept social interactions with us to the bare minimum. But there we were, seated at her oversized glass table overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was still half frozen in patches, sunlight bouncing off the ice in sharp, dazzling flickers. She served quiche. Talked about her garden. Avoided business entirely. At one point, Henry excused himself to take a call from a colleague, and Margot and I were left alone with our coffee. She looked at me for a long moment, her face softer than usual. I underestimated you, she said finally. I didn't say anything. I thought you'd fold. Or defer. Like most people do around me. I met her gaze, keeping mine steady. I'm not most people. No, she said. You're not. She didn't apologize. She didn't gush, or soften, or try to pretend we were suddenly close. But it was the first time she spoke to me as an equal. Not as someone who had married into the family. Not as someone she had to tolerate. As a peer. She changed the subject immediately after. Back to garden renovations, and whether or not Henry had been watering her orchids properly the last time he visited. But the shift lingered even after we left. Henry noticed it too. In the car, he said, she was different today. She was careful, I replied. Do you think she respects you now? I paused, watching the snow drift past the windshield as we drove. I think she has to. It wasn't until spring that things came full circle. By then, I had been CFO for a little over 7 months. Long enough for the numbers to start showing change. Long enough that even the board, the crustiest, old money group of holdouts I'd ever worked with, began to openly praise the financial turnaround. We'd cut costs by 12% across 3 underperforming sectors. Reallocated capital into 2 thriving property clusters in Milwaukee and Grand Rapids. Reworked the entire debt structure to leverage low-interest market gaps. The boardroom chatter started to shift from Margot's legacy to the new leadership team. Stephen, the CEO, started mentioning my name more often in public press briefings. Nothing flashy, just quiet acknowledgments. Natalia Baird has been instrumental, or our finance division, under Natalia's guidance. I didn't seek the spotlight. But it found me anyway. One morning, I got an invitation. The Midwest Real Estate and Finance Summit was hosting its annual keynote dinner in Chicago, and they wanted me to speak. Not just on a panel, the keynote. I accepted. Of course I did. But I didn't tell Margot. Not at first. The event was hosted at the Four Seasons downtown. Black tie. Media. Industry leaders. All the people who used to be her people. The same people who used to sit at Margot Mallory's table. That night, I wore a sleek black dress. Nothing extravagant. Elegant. Confident. Henry stood beside me in a tailored tuxedo he'd never thought he'd wear, one hand lightly at my back as we walked into the ballroom. And Margot? She was there. I saw her across the room, dressed in navy, standing with two board members and her longtime COO. Her eyes found mine the moment I stepped onto the carpeted floor. I walked past her. Nodded once. And continued toward the stage. The speech wasn't about her. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about evolution. About how companies built on rigid legacy models were destined to collapse under their own weight. How vision required agility. How finance wasn't just about money, it was about choices. Timing. And guts. I spoke about the courage to challenge assumptions, even inherited ones. About the power of being underestimated. I didn't use her name once. But she heard it. Everyone did. Afterward, there was a line of people wanting to speak to me. Handshakes, compliments, business cards being pressed into my palm. The energy was electric. Margot didn't approach me. She left before the crowd thinned. I saw her slip out through a side door with the COO beside her. I thought that would be the last of it. Her silence, her absence, those had always been her tools. But 2 days later, I got another email. From the board. They were restructuring the executive leadership team. Margot was stepping down from daily operations. Officially transitioning to emeritus advisor status. And they wanted me to assume expanded strategic oversight beyond finance. It wasn't CEO, Stephen still held that. But it was second in command. It was power. Real power. I didn't gloat. I didn't march into her office or call a meeting to revel in it. But I did go to her house. Henry came with me. We brought a bottle of wine, like always. We sat at her long dining room table while she poured coffee in silence. The room felt smaller than it used to. Finally, she sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me. So, she said, you've made it. I nodded. No thanks to you. She stared at me. Not angry. Not impressed. Just calculating. Then, she did something I'll never forget. She laughed. Quietly. Almost to herself. I spent years building this company, she said. Tearing it from dirt. Clawing through every old man who thought I didn't belong at the table. And now? She looked up, eyes sharp. I suppose it's only fitting the woman who outmaneuvered me was married to my son. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. Maybe if you had respected women like me from the beginning, this wouldn't feel like losing, I said. She nodded once. And that was it. No apology. No drama. No vindication speech. Just a small, silent surrender from the one person who never thought she'd need to give it. In the end, I didn't destroy her. I didn't need to. I did something better. I replaced her. And I did it without screaming, without fighting, without losing who I was. I did it by being everything she thought I wasn't. Capable. Strategic. And above all, quietly, unmistakably indispensable. And as for Henry and me? We're still here. Still solid. He says he sees me more clearly now than ever before. Not because I changed, but because he finally saw the full shape of the woman I'd always been. He once told me, "You didn't beat her. You became something bigger than what she ever imagined." That, to me, was the sweetest revenge of all.